Good evening, everyone. I'm Sue Herrera. Susie Garib has the evening off.
And I'm Tyler Matheson, and I am not a winterholic. In fact, I am so done with it. But our lead story tonight, alas, is not about me. It's about the economy and how it's being affected, and in a big way, by the most brutal run of harsh winter weather in years. Another massive ice and snowstorm called Winter Storm Pax slammed into Atlanta and North Carolina today and will be making its way through Virginia into the Northeast tonight and tomorrow. Some forecasts call for up to a foot of snow in and around Philadelphia, New York City, Boston. About 1 out of every 3 Americans will feel this storm. It will close schools, snarl traffic, ground planes, and, more important for business, exact a toll on economic activity. So what is the real cost of all this wicked winter weather on the U.S. economy? Our Steve Leisman takes a look.
It's pounded the Midwest, the South, and the Northeast. So it's no surprise that the weather is now expected to pound the national economy. Bone-chilling cold and widespread snow is likely a major culprit in the recent economic weakness. That's turned Janet Yellen this week, the nation's new chief of the Federal Reserve, into something of a meteorologist.
There were weather factors. We've had unseasonably cold temperatures that may be affecting economic activity in the job market and elsewhere.
If it feels like there's more snow this year, you're absolutely right. Last year at this time, just 43% of the nation was covered with snow, and a lot of those areas were sparsely populated. This year, even before the big storm hits the Northeast, 60% of the nation is covered in snow, and includes both heavily populated areas and places like the South that almost never see snow, making the economic disruption that much worse. The ice and the snow in places like Atlanta has workers staying home this time instead of slip-sliding to the office. Those are lost work hours for the economy. Shoppers also stay away from the malls, meaning lost sales that will show up in corporate profits and reduced national growth. What winter weather taketh, it also giveth back. So economists expect a snapback from pent-up demand in the spring, when Americans are expected to brush off the ice and the snow and emerge at long last from their homes turned igloos.
Yeah, it feels that way. All right, Steve Leisman joins us now with more on the economic impact. Also with us is Paul Walsh. She's vice president at Weather Analytics. So, Steve, how seriously do you think the Fed takes the economic impact that this is going to have on the economy? And does it change the way that they do the pullback in economic stimulus?
I think they take it very seriously because they really want to know what the underlying trend is. And then you have a situation where we have some weakness in the economy, and we don't always know what's attributable to weather and what isn't, because a lot of times with corporations that miss on their earnings, it's a convenient excuse. Yes. The same may also go for politicians, so we don't know. What we do know is we look at the graphics that I showed you earlier, that, by the way, my good friend Paul Walsh puts together for us, and we look at how much colder it's been than normal and how much snowier it's been than normal, and we see unusual data, and that makes us think that maybe some of the weakness is coming from the snow. And Tyler's fact earlier, 1 in 3, it's the greater population that is affected by this that is really the key to what's different about it.
Yeah. So, Paul Walsh, let me turn to you. You know, Steve mentioned earlier that there may be a kind of a snapback effect after all this harsh winter gets away, and maybe the spring is warmer and less rainy than last spring was. Do you see that? Do you expect that?
I do. I actually think that what's going to happen is for a couple of reasons. Number one, cabin fever is a real factor in terms of getting people jazzed for spring. And when you have this kind of situation where you've got a long period of time where it's brutally cold, which we've been going through, you don't even need warm weather. You just need more seasonal weather to really drive a resurgence in demand. So what I think is going to happen is by the time we get into mid-March, maybe late March, when it becomes more seasonally warm, even if it's colder than normal, it doesn't matter at this point. It just needs to be not a polar vortex. I think we're going to see a resurgence in demand. I think that retailers stand to benefit, actually. I think the comp works out really well because last year we had a really cold spring that lasted all the way into May. So when you put those two things together, I think retailers are actually in a pretty good shape for the balance of Q1 once we get through this, the balance of February and even into Q2.
But Steve, the economy has been recovering, but it's kind of a fragile recovery in a lot of ways. And for some businesses, this can be a really lethal blow in some ways. That nobody's I'm not shopping. I'm a shopaholic, and I'm not doing it.
Especially the retail business, which has been going through a lot of changes that have nothing to do with the weather. They have to do with the balance of the internet, and you're just barely hanging on. You get a winter like this, all of a sudden you can't make it. Just before we came on, there was a report from the Cheesecake Factory missing its earnings, blaming the weather.
Really?
So that's the kind of thing that's out there. And I don't think among the things that Paul was talking, you get a snapback in cheesecake purchases come this spring. So I think that's an area that doesn't make back for lost economic time.
Paul, you're agreeing with that. That is money that is not going to come back. You're not going to go and eat twice as much cheesecake at the Cheesecake Factory simply because you missed it last week because of a winter storm. So some businesses will be affected. Are there businesses that can take advantage of either the bad weather or that pent-up demand?
Oh, for sure. And even from a bad weather perspective, the large retailers, so for example, the Home Depots of the world, the Walmarts of the world that have very advanced supply chains now are able to move product. They monitor the weather and they move product so they have just enough at the right time. So example, last week, I live outside of Philly, had no power. Friday morning, I was in Home Depot. They had 120 generators. They had already sold 100 of them, but they still had 20 left. So they are able to actually take advantage of that. And in terms of taking advantage of the snapback in, I think retailers are also looking at that positively as well and taking action to get in front of it.
There's another thing out there, which is that delivery companies are doing better, guys, because people aren't going out to get stuff. There's also a bit of a cabin fever business. We heard a little bit of a surge in alcohol sales, and I haven't heard this, but I'm guessing the cable networks may do better because on demand, whatever people do when they're in their house, they may be spending that money they were going to spend out of the house.
Or Netflix.
Spend it. Netflix is something that could benefit because of that. These cabin fever companies are out there that are making some money on this.
And Steve, there's also a baby boom that typically happens about 9 months after every one of these events. So it's a delayed reaction.
Well, there's an upside.
That would be a delayed reaction, wouldn't it?
There's an upside to the polar vortex in there somewhere.
Yes, there is.
You know, Steve, the weather aside, how does the economic recovery look to you? Because the jobs figures have been a little squishy. Some of that's weather-related.
And some of this data is going to be lumpy over the next few weeks, isn't it?
It's going to be a huge problem. I thought it looked really good going through the fourth quarter. We did 4.1 in the third quarter, 2.6, and just so people know, 2.5 was about what we had been doing, so we had a little bump up.
Right.
Everybody thought first quarter, you had a little run up in inventories. The stuff on the shelves is a big swing factor in quarter-to-quarter growth. We thought we were going to have an inventory drawdown. We're going to sell the stuff on the shelves, not necessarily replace it. That was expected in the first quarter. What I think is happening right now, why you say that very technical term squishy, is absolutely accurate, Sue. You're going to have this inventory drawdown, a little bit of bounce back from that strength in the third and fourth quarter, compounded with the weather. So it's not going to look good for probably January and February at this point.
All right. Steve Leisman, Paul Walsh, thank you guys both very much.
Thanks.